In the long winter nights of North America's ancient forests, it often feels as though nothing exists between heaven and earth but bitter winds and heavy snow. When night falls, the darkness descends like a heavy curtain, pressing down until it's hard to breathe. In such harsh conditions, the indigenous people who live there aren't afraid of wolves or bears. They fear a gaunt, eternally hungry monster known as the Wendigo. It's said that the Wendigo is no ordinary creature. It stands tall and emaciated, nearly twice the height of a person, with skin stretched tight over its bones like a walking corpse. Its crimson eyes radiate a suffocating sense of dread and cold, and icicle-like fangs protrude from a mouth that exhales a revolting stench of decay. What's truly terrifying is that the Wendigo is never satisfied. No matter how much flesh it devours, its hunger persists, an ever-present drive that compels it to hunt again and again. Surprisingly, the Wendigo doesn't attack humans outright. Instead, it prefers to silently approach those who are starving and near death in the frozen wilderness. It fixes its crimson gaze upon them, almost as if whispering, luring the desperate to consume the flesh of their own kind. In that state, caught between hunger and terror, a person's will is easily broken. Should they succumb to the temptation and take that step, there's no turning back. Greed and hunger seep like venom into their soul, swiftly devouring their sanity. Those who have been seduced into cannibalism soon begin to change. Their eyes grow hollow, their bodies twist and distort, and it's as if an endless hunger burns in their veins. Their humanity is gradually erased, piece by piece, until nothing remains. From that moment on, they become a new Wendigo, doomed to wander the ice-bound forests, forever hungry and forever alone. In the ancient lore of the Algonquian peoples, the first Wendigo was once an ordinary tribesman. That year, the winter was unusually long. Blizzards blocked hunting paths, and the tribe's stored food dwindled rapidly. People went hungry, forced to watch their loved ones weaken and fall one by one. Among them was a hunter known for his strong will. After being trapped in the wilderness for days by a storm, he finally struggled back to camp, only to find his wife and children little more than skin and bones, too weak to even lift their heads. With no game left to hunt in the blizzard, despair overtook him. He made the unforgivable choice. He ate the flesh of the dead. The moment that flesh touched his lips, the icy wind seemed to halt, and a low howl echoed between heaven and earth. The hunter's soul shattered in the darkness. His body twisted and contorted. His eyes sank. His skin stretched taut over his frame, and his limbs grew long and grotesque. Even worse, the act of devouring his companion didn't ease his hunger. It magnified his craving beyond all limits. That night, the first Wendigo emerged into the North American woods. It roamed the snowy wastes, its eyes empty, its cries tearing through the sky as it hunted human flesh. Legend says that from then on, anyone who breaks the taboo of consuming human flesh during famine suffers the same curse, transformed into a new Wendigo, forever wandering the frozen wilds. Ever since, during the long winter nights in North America, tribal shamans would chant ancient prayers around the bonfire, performing rituals of burning bones and flesh to plead for protection from the forest and the storms. Bear bones, venison, and even human remains were often cast into the flames, for the people believed that only the rising smoke could soothe the Wendigos wandering the icy plains and keep them from approaching the camp. What's more, after the first Wendigo emerged, anyone in the tribe who showed unusual greed during famine, shifting their eyes during food distribution, or lurking around the camp at night, would immediately draw suspicion. The people believed such behavior meant the Wendigo's spirit had already entered them, and their soul was on the verge of transformation. So when the elders suspected someone was possessed by the Wendigo, the shaman would swiftly perform a ritual. This usually involved burning incense, beating drums, and waving bear claws or eagle feathers over the accused to drive out any evil spirits. If the person showed extreme aggression or an uncontrollable craving for human flesh, they were deemed fully possessed. In such cases, the tribe would not hesitate to cast them out into the blizzard to perish. In more extreme instances, they might even be executed by fire or blade. The tribe firmly believed that if left unchecked, a true Wendigo would emerge from their former kin, and the entire community would face endless suffering. If the Wendigo had remained just a tribal legend, people might have comforted themselves that it was only a campfire story. But coldly documented in Canada's historical archives is a spine-chilling, real-life Wendigo case. In the winter of 1879, the forests of Alberta, Canada, were buried under heavy snow. Icy winds howled like blades through the trees. It was in this frozen wilderness that a Cree man named Swift Runner lost his way. Trapped in the ancient woods with his wife and children, their food ran out completely, and there was no game to be found. Their journey turned into a desperate struggle for survival. Months later, as the snow began to melt, people finally saw Swift Runner staggering out of the forest. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, as though his soul had been left behind in the snow. Shockingly, his wife and children were nowhere to be seen. When questioned about their whereabouts, he initially hesitated and evaded. But under pressure, he confessed to a truth that froze everyone who heard it. In his bottomless hunger, he had eaten his own wife and children. His confession horrified the community, and soon the authorities were notified. After Swift Runner was arrested and stood before a judge, his defense was not a denial, but something even more eerie. In a low voice, he told the judge, "I was possessed by the Wendigo. It called to me in my dreams, commanding me to eat human flesh. I resisted, but its voice grew clearer, stronger, until I could no longer fight it." His explanation, unsurprisingly, did not convince the court. In the end, Swift Runner was sentenced to death by hanging, bringing his controversial life to a close. Yet his words lingered like a cold nail driven into the hearts of those who heard them. To the indigenous people of that time, this was not merely a case of murder, it was evidence that the Wendigo had truly appeared. What's more unsettling is that cases like Swift Runner's are not isolated incidents in North America. In fact, historical archives in Canada and the northern United States contain numerous records of Wendigo possession. Many accounts describe indigenous people under extreme hunger and isolation, exhibiting bizarre psychological states. Some became convinced they were turning into monsters, unable to resist the craving for human flesh. Others even begged tribal elders to kill them before they lost control and harmed others. By the 20th century, with advances in psychology and anthropology, scholars began attempting to explain the Wendigo through scientific lens. They were no longer satisfied with treating it as mere folklore. Instead, they turned to pathology and environmental psychology for answers. In the mid-20th century, Canadian researchers proposed an environmental psychology perspective. Imagine being trapped for weeks in sub-zero temperatures, enduring prolonged hunger, oxygen deprivation, isolation, and despair. Under such conditions, hallucinations and delusions become almost inevitable. Studies suggest that when the brain is deprived of glucose for extended periods, perception becomes distorted, sometimes leading to projective hallucinations. In other words, people externalize their deepest fears. For the Algonquian peoples, the most familiar embodiment of terror was the Wendigo. So when starvation-induced hallucinations set in, that fearsome figure naturally emerged from the depths of their psyche. Under this explanation, the Wendigo is not a real monster, but rather a cultural expression of human mental collapse under extreme conditions. This seemingly logical theory, however, has been firmly rejected by tribal elders. In shamanic tradition, the Wendigo is not an illness explainable by physiology or psychology, nor is it a mere projection. It is a very real evil spirit. For many indigenous tribes across North America, the natural world is not simply a collection of trees, rivers, and animals. It is a spiritual whole. Mountains, rivers, wind, snow, and fire all possess spirits, and the Wendigo is one of the most dangerous and sinister among them. In these ancient beliefs, the Wendigo does not appear without cause. It is a punishment from nature and the spirits, an evil released through human greed, destruction, and desecration. If someone chooses cannibalism out of hunger during a harsh winter, or is blinded by endless greed, they open a crack in their soul through which the Wendigo may enter. It devours them from within until both body and soul are utterly transformed. To this day, the Wendigo lingers between legend and reality. Scientific explanations may seem rational, yet they fail to convince completely. Those shadowy figures glimpsed in the snow, the inexplicable madness recorded in case files, all keep the Wendigo hauntingly elusive, yet eerily real. Perhaps it was never just a story. It may be a demon lurking deep within the human soul, or a real predator roaming the snowy wilderness. So next time you find yourself alone in a blizzard-filled forest, if you hear low groans mingled with the howling wind, don't look back. The eyes watching you from the darkness just might belong to the Wendigo.